Sylvia, if you want to go ahead and take it away.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on a Saturday morning, 3:50 Chicago. We work diligently to try to bring you new information on a monthly basis about going fossil fuel free, renewable energy, and so forth. And for today, our guest speaker is Gigi Norcross from Green Century Capital Management. I've known Gigi and Green Century for years now, and I'm proud to introduce her because the divestment movement from fossil fuels has been growing. I think at this point we're over 15 trillion around the world. Institutions and individuals have committed to divesting, but Green Century was one of the original mutual fund companies to be completely fossil fuel free. On top of other work that they do proactively to help protect the environment. So this is, they're not just jumping on the bandwagon and putting together fossil fuel-free products. They have a bit more to share with you today. So with that, I'll pass it on to Gigi to tell us more about it.
Great. Thank you, Sylvia, and thank 350 Chicago for allowing me to come into your monthly meeting this month. I have lived in Chicago for a good long time, so that you know a little bit more about my background. I actually got started working on environmental issues as a college student. I took a position during the summer as a canvasser, going door to door for an organization called MassPIRG, or Massachusetts Public Interest Research Group. That was my first sort of experience with working on environmental campaigns. From that, I went and did fundraising work for a couple of decades. So organizations would hire my firm to conduct their fundraising campaigns primarily over the phone. And a healthy percentage of the organizations that I worked with were environmental organizations, though the firm touched on a lot of different social issues. And then I've been with Green Century now for a little more than a year. So between all of those things, I have kind of a few decades at this point of doing work on environmental issues. And I'm happy to be able to spend a little bit of time with you all today. So on that note, I'm going to share my screen and then we can get going. So the presentation here is maybe about 45 minutes in length. We'll see how it goes, where we'll spend time talking about kind of Green Century, the firm, what we're all about, and our approach. So how we approach making an environmental impact. And then sort of drilling down on each of the pieces of our approach. So that is what we'll do. It's a pretty small group here, so my hope is that we can do kind of questions throughout. I don't know if we need to do housekeeping, but if you have questions over the course of the presentation and we're not at a question-taking point, just throw it into the chat, and then we can just make sure that we don't miss any questions along the way. Green Century. So first, kind of who we are. We're the first family of fossil fuel-free, responsible, and diversified mutual funds in the U.S. And by family, we mean that we have 3 mutual funds, all of which are fossil fuel-free. So it's not that you can pick and choose your fossil fuel-free products from Green Century's host of investment products available. It's that we're fossil fuel-free across the board. Investment advisor to 3 mutual funds, and those are listed here, 2 index funds and a balanced fund. And we'll talk a little bit more about the investment strategy within those as part of the presentation. Leader of a highly effective shareholder advocacy program, which is one of my favorite parts to talk about with Green Century. And we've got some very recent engagements that are fun, and so that's part of the presentation too. And then we're the only U.S. mutual fund owned by environmental and public health organizations. So I mentioned that my first job out of college, or actually in college, was with Massachusetts Public Interest Research Group. That's one of Green Century's owners, a unique part of our story. So that is also a little bit more information on that. It is also part of the presentation. We were established in Boston in 1991. So Green Century has been in the sustainable and impact investing space for a good long time. We're coming up on our 30th anniversary, which we will celebrate in 2021. So as Sylvia says, we're not a new kid on the block. We have been doing investing in this way for far longer than it's been popular to do so. And while we appreciate and applaud the fact that sustainable investing is becoming more commonplace, we really celebrate that. We're also proud of the fact that we've been in it in this way since the start. Okay, so on our impact, we like to describe our impact as a three-pronged approach or triple impact. So the first part is in the investments themselves. We invest in sustainable companies, innovative renewable energy and water, healthy food companies, as well as companies with industry-leading environmental, social, and governance or ESG performance ratings. So that's the first part of our approach, and that is the first part of the presentation here, what we'll dig in to first. Secondly, we lead a highly effective shareholder advocacy program. We engage approximately 50 companies a year to use the power of our investments, the power of the fact that we've got investments and lots of them, investors, in our mutual funds to advocate for and pressure for change in meaningful and robust ways across a range of environmental issues. So that's the second part of our approach, and we'll get into some of the specifics later in the presentation. And then finally, support environmental and public health nonprofits. Green Century Capital Management is a for-profit business, and its profits, the profits that are earned in managing the funds, 100% of those go to our owners, which then in turn supports their environmental and public health initiatives. So three parts: invest in sustainable companies, lead an effective shareholder advocacy program that's really unparalleled in the industry, and support environmental and public health nonprofits. And we'll dive into each of those parts over the course of the next few minutes. Okay, so first part, invest in sustainable companies. We deploy multiple investment strategies in our investment decision-making and portfolio decision-making. Environmental and social governance, ESG, or environmental, social, and governance performance ratings are the first part. So since we started, we have been using those performance ratings to invest in companies that are leading in their sector. So that part of our strategy is what we allow in. So companies have to meet certain rating standards in order to be in Green Century's holdings. Secondly, we screen bad companies out. So Green Century does not invest in the industries that are listed here: firearms, military weapons, tobacco, GMOs, nuclear energy, or nuclear weapons. And then one of our three funds, the Balance Fund, also screens out factory farms. So the first part is using criteria to allow companies in. The second part is using screens to screen bad companies out. And then the custom part, or at least very custom part of our investment strategies, is our fossil fuel screens. So Green Century funds do not invest in corporations that do any of the things that are listed on the screen here. And so we'll pause on this for a second because there are more and more products out there that label themselves as ESG. There are also more and more products out there that identify themselves as being ones with an environmental screen. And then there are also products out there that identify themselves as being fossil fuel free. A thing to know is that fossil fuel free in one place is not necessarily the same as fossil fuel free in another. And so digging in to understand how fossil fuel free is defined is an important part of evaluating investment decisions. So in our case, it's a rigorous definition of fossil fuel free, and one that is written into our prospectus for each of our funds. Not inconsistently applied, but applied in the same way across all three of our funds. We'll spend the next few slides are ones that are kind of why to invest this way and what that gets you. And for this group, I think a lot of that is preaching to the choir. We'll spend maybe not as much time on this as I might with other groups. But divestment prevents potential financial and performance risks associated with the fossil fuel industry. And we've got some slides that sort of speak to that. Divestment aligns your investments with your values. Divestment undermines the industry's political influence over national policy. Oil and gas is politically powerful. Divesting from those companies, it helps to reduce that political influence. And divestment allows for, instead of money going to oil and gas and fracking, to go to clean energy and things that are sustainable. So a little bit on then each one of those things. So why invest fossil fuel free? Divesting allows the performance is there. It's a myth that investing in this way, it means that you have to trade off something in performance. The fact is that the fossil fuel sector has been the worst performing sector, certainly for the last year, but also for the last decade. So this chart shows excluding fossil fuels, blue line, with fossil fuels, yellow line or orange line, however that appears on your screen. So clearly in the last several years, the distance between those lines is more pronounced, but it's also been the case that it's tracked, at or ahead of the fossil fuel sector for a long time. So as I say, it is a myth that investing in this way sacrifices performance. That is really no longer the case. On the moral and value alignment, unlike Green Century, most mutual funds invest in oil and coal and fracking companies. So we believe that responsible mutual funds should not invest in irresponsible companies, and that people, investors who care about the planet, may not want to financially support the corporations that are bearing most of the blame for climate change. Divesting allows you to put your values to work in your investments. Political influence of polluters. Fossil fuel companies for decades have used their money to conceal the truth about global warming and to promote their own self-serving policies, environmental policies. Divestment has historically allowed for great change, significant change. If it can help to topple apartheid in South Africa, then it can help to erode the power of fossil fuel companies here in the United States. Sylvia already referenced how much is being generated in divestment. We've got a number that's a little less than yours, Sylvia, but it could be that it's not quite up to date, but $14.38 trillion approximately, and just over 1,200 institutions have divested from fossil fuels since the start of collaborative efforts. And that's politically powerful. And then finally, on allowing for investments in sustainable companies, some of this is a little more unique to at Green Century. So if you're not investing in fossil fuels, then you are investing in things that are better for the planet. And these are some examples of companies that are in our holdings. Pulling out a couple of them, Vestas Wind System, largest global energy wind provider. 100% of this company's electricity comes from renewable sources. And that's one example of, because you're choosing to not invest in oil and gas and fracking, you are investing in a company that does this great stuff. Also hang a little bit on Starbucks, because where Starbucks resides in our investment strategies is kind of cool. So one of our funds, two of our funds are index funds and all equities. One of our funds is a balance fund, and the mix of that balance is about 60% stocks and 40% bonds. On the fixed income side, about half of those holdings are in green bonds, or bonds that are issued by companies for sustainability purposes. An example of one of those is Starbucks' inaugural sustainability bond, which is in our balance fund holdings. So the proceeds that came from this bond were being dedicated towards a few things, but one example is training farmers how to grow coffee more sustainably. So allows for investments in sustainable companies. That's one sort of big picture thing, but then also specific to Green Century is that a portion of one of our funds is specifically dedicated towards green ponds, like the Starbucks one. Okay, a couple things then on how to invest fossil fuel free. 3 steps. We have a whole guide to fossil fuel free investing on our website. So that's something that you can access from our website and download. And it really boils down to 3 parts. Find out what you own. Investment should be 0% in the energy sector. As mentioned, the fossil fuel free exclusion should be written into the prospectus. And if you're working with a financial advisor, they can help navigate you through the details. But if not, there's a lot of information available out there for anybody. And then mutual fund companies are obviously required to provide information on their funds in the form of a prospectus, which you can access from websites. Divest, move out of coal, oil, and gas stocks in the mutual funds and ETFs that invest in them. And then also consider changing to a bank that does not provide loans to fossil fuel companies. And that's been a source of a lot of organizing and campaigning over the course of the last couple of years as part of the divestment campaign, is divest from the energy companies themselves, but also divest from the banks that fund them. And then the third part, reinvest. So move your money that's moved out of the dangerous companies and into fossil fuel-free mutual funds and ETFs. Open a checking account at a bank that doesn't support pipeline projects or the most destructive fossil fuel companies. We speak a lot on the topic of fossil fuel free. So you might be familiar with at least the top person on this panel. We did an Earth Day panel this year. We've actually done a lot of events this year that are virtual, of course. I did one with Sylvia just in September around Climate Week that was not attended by as many people as an Earth Day event with Bill McKibben. There were about 1,000 people that attended this Earth Day event, which is great. It was great to see. There is a recording of this event is available from our website. But the point that I wanted to make on this presentation is that the interest in fossil fuel free investing certainly is on the increase. We were not expecting to get over 1,000 people attending this event in April, but we did, and that's that has been great to see. Since Green Century has been in this space for a long time, to see that kind of interest and turnout was empowering. Okay, so why don't I haven't really been paying attention to the chats, but why don't I pause here? Because like I say, this presentation is sort of in 3 parts. The first part being on sustainable investment strategy and fossil fuel free in particular. And then we'll go into shareholder advocacy and our ownership structure. So why don't I pause here for a second to see if we can take some questions on this part.
There was a question about what MSCI stands for that I tried to answer.
Yeah.
That's just basically an investment research company that tracks the financial capital market. Yep, and I see that, and I don't have anything to add. It's also the case that MSCI for us is the analysis, our ESG analysis comes from MSCI. There are other providers
but MSCI is one of the big ones, and one that we have used consistently from the start. Okay.
I'm curious if you know, you mentioned that only the balanced fund screens out factory farms, which are the large, like mega farms with like cattle and pigs and poultry that have a lot of like pollution impacts and reliance on antibiotics. I'm curious, why isn't it in the other two funds?
It's unique to that fund and something that we would consider for the other two, but it's also been the case that the Balance Fund has screened that out from the start. So if we were to apply it to the other two, that would change some things about the construction of those funds. But then it's also the case that factory farms don't score very well on ESG criteria. And so functionally, those industries don't make it into the equity or the index funds anyway.
Gotcha. So, but you just don't have it explicitly written in to your
Right.
policy statement. Okay,
Yeah, that's right. And it also helps to propel some of our shareholder advocacy work, which we'll get to next. But increasingly, we are doing more and more work in the space of animal welfare and then also plant-based proteins. And a lot of those engagements come from our holdings in the Balance Fund in particular.
Great.
Okay, so let's move to the next slide. Shareholder advocacy. Okay, our impact story is in 3 parts: the investments themselves, shareholder advocacy work, and our ownership structure. So this part is on shareholder advocacy. So we press or engage about 50 companies a year to adopt stronger environmental policies. A little bit about how the shareholder advocacy program is structured. We have 3 shareholder advocates, so it's an entirely in-house operation. 3 shareholder advocates. In normal times, they're all based out of our Boston office and led by our president, Leslie Samuel Rich. A bit about her. Before Green Century, before coming to Green Century, she, for a number of years, ran an organization called Corporate Accountability. And as the name might suggest, that organization is focused on holding corporations accountable to their members and shareholders. So Leslie brought the experience that she achieved from running that organization to Green Century and has really helped to take an already robust shareholder advocacy program and amp it up several notches. Our 3 shareholder advocates split up the lay of the land in terms of issue areas and then do the analysis from within our holdings to identify corporations that could stand to make some changes in their corporate practices and then be receptive to the pressure that could come from a mutual fund company like ours. So as you see here, the issue areas are in a number of different places, from forests to climate change to pollinators. I'll hang for a little bit on the transitioning to clean energy example. Verizon, second largest telecommunications company in the country. We engaged them on this topic. They came to the table with a commitment to source 4% of their energy from renewables and not by a defined period of time. The end result of that engagement was a commitment to source 50% of its energy from renewables by 2025. So this is I like talking about this engagement because it's an example of what we consider to be a very successful engagement. So it's a household name, large enough to have a significant impact. Their corporate policies have a significant impact on the planet overall. A very substantial policy change on a defined period of time. So that really checks all the boxes for us in terms of what we consider to be a successful engagement. This one policy change from Verizon in terms of the cuts to emissions is the equivalent of taking 500,000 cars off the So good, check, move on to the next thing. And then since we've had this engagement, the follow-up conversations around implementation have been satisfactory. And so that's an important piece of our shareholder advocacy program too, which we'll talk about here. The scope of our shareholder advocacy program is robust. We start with proxy voting. We consider that a necessary part of being a mutual fund company. We use ESG criteria to vote proxy ballots in-house for approximately 700 companies every year. And so the team that is responsible for that, we all give them a lot of love during that time of year, because we're voting approximately the ballots for approximately 700 companies sort of all in one period of time every year. But we don't think that proxy voting alone is shareholder advocacy. So always encourage, people that are sort of evaluating their investment options. If shareholder advocacy program, that kind of work is important to you in your investment decisions, to take a look at what that means. So proxy voting, that's our baseline. The rest of our shareholder advocacy goes well beyond that. So on company engagement, as mentioned, we engage approximately 50 companies a year, and those engagements take different forms. So we hold dialogues to secure policy changes. If those dialogues are not resulting in anything meaningful, we file shareholder resolutions. And then the commitments that come from that, we ensure follow through to ensure implementation of the commitments by the agreed upon timelines. Green Century is also involved on these issues, particularly on forests, which is our lead sort of program area work around the globe. So we work collaboratively with a number of different associations and organizations to propel these issues forward. We recently engaged Procter & Gamble. You might be familiar with them. They produce a lot of things, including toilet paper, so they're having a pretty good year. But they produce those products in ways that are not necessarily great for the environment. And so this is not the same as a Verizon type of win. We don't really consider a shareholder advocacy engagement a win until we've got a substantive policy agreement, a change to policy that is geared towards sustainability and better things for the planet. That's not what this is. This is a dialogue that resulted in non-action, which resulted in a vote that was held at P&G's last month annual meeting. We have produced actually a video on this, so I'm going to go ahead, and this is kind of hot off the presses, so I'm going to go ahead and share this with all of you, and then we'll pause after this.
Gigi, I think you might have to share audio. I'm not hearing any sound here.
Oh, right. Okay, let me see. How do you do that actually?
So I think if you go to the mute button and then the arrow to the right of that up, it'll have some options for audio, and you would have to, I believe, whatever options you have available for a speaker, just select the one that would be like computer. And if we can't figure this out, then we can also provide a link in the video that we make available after this goes out on YouTube.
Yeah. That was the one piece of this that I sort of forgot to look into.
I can suggest something too. It usually is a box before you click share screen. In that window that pops up to choose which screen, there's a checkbox at the bottom that says share computer audio. So you might just need to stop sharing and reshare. As long as it's the same computer presenting versus, or it probably doesn't matter.
It's definitely the same computer. So let me try that. And then if that doesn't work, then I can just talk about it, because that works too.
Thank you very much, Lisa.
Share computer sound. Very good. Okay, now we're going to try it again.
A company like P&G to adopt more sustainable sourcing practices can have a huge impact.
Can you turn up the volume just a little bit? It's faint.
We began engaging Procter & Gamble at the beginning of 2020 over concerns about the company's sourcing practices. P&G is falling behind on commitments it made on palm oil in 2014, and the company didn't have plans to address some of its biggest supply chain problems.
Is your computer audio all the way up?
That are instrumental for addressing climate change and are home to threatened species like caribou. P&G was also being targeted by NGOs for failing to adopt robust policies that address these concerns and was facing growing reputational risk from an escalating public pressure campaign. We spent months talking to the company, urging it to adopt policies that would reduce its impact on the environment, and we filed a shareholder resolution, but unfortunately we couldn't come to a satisfactory agreement. So the resolution was included on the company's proxy, and ultimately P&G shareholders voted on it. In the weeks leading up to the vote, Green Century spoke with P&G's largest shareholders to educate them about deforestation and the risks the company could face if it doesn't address it. We must have been pretty convincing. Our shareholder resolution received support of 67% of the votes cast. Even BlackRock voted for it, and it hadn't supported any of the 15 deforestation-related resolutions that had come to a vote since 2012. This is the largest amount of support that a resolution on deforestation has ever received. It's also the first time a deforestation resolution has been approved at the company's annual meeting. We hope P&G's leadership heeds the call from its investors to increase its efforts to stop driving deforestation and forest degradation, and we're going to continue to work closely with the company and continue to urge them to adopt strong policies that will meaningfully reduce the company's impact on our environment.
Sorry, I have to show you this disclaimer. And now I will pause it. Okay, so that gives that story in a nutshell. Remains to be seen, sort of what happens from here. The woman in the video is Jessie Waxman, who's our lead shareholder advocate on forest and forest protection efforts. And we'll take it from here just in terms of our engagements with Procter & Gamble, but we are optimistic that the lack of response that we got at the outset might be different just given what's transpired through their annual meeting and through the voting on this resolution. Okay, so the next thing is our ownership structure, that wraps the shareholder advocacy component. So why don't I pause here and see if there's any questions about shareholder advocacy before I move on.
Yeah, we did have one from Lisa. So Lisa asks, how diverse are the business sizes in your funds? We're seeing the stock market continue to rise despite the closure of small businesses across the country, which further shows the disproportionate economic power corporations have over the country. Do your investment strategies try to address that imbalance between corporations and small businesses?
No, they really don't. The companies that are in our holdings are, for the most part, not small businesses. So while we applaud that as an investment strategy more generally, it is not an investment strategy that's part of Green Century's decision-making. In part because of our starting point, which is that we are trying to engage companies on a big scale to use our position as investors, as shareholders, to advocate for significant policy changes. So our investment strategies don't specifically try to address the imbalance that you're talking about here.
And I'll also add just that Green Century couldn't even really, if it wanted to, because mutual funds can only buy stocks and bonds in the publicly traded market, which is regulated by the Securities and Exchange Commission. So when you hear about maybe an IPO, an initial public offering being released, and you can buy stock in this company, it's a company that was small and applied to the SEC to offer stocks publicly. And they go through a whole registration process and review. And in order to even be able to apply to the SEC to make your stocks available to the public to be bought and sold, you have to have at least $300 million in revenue. And that makes you like the bottom smallest fish possible. So it wouldn't even be an option for Green Century to try to support much smaller businesses. That's when you have to go into the private side and private funds, which is just a whole different other ballgame in the financial scape.
All right, so any other questions on shareholder advocacy before we move on to the next thing? Okay, well then we'll move on to the next thing. So impact 3, so triple impact, we're on the third part. Make a difference by supporting environmental and public health nonprofits. So we're the only US mutual fund that is owned by not-for-profit organizations, and that's a big differentiator. Green Century Capital Management manages the Green Century funds. The profits that come from that then go to our nonprofit owners to support their environmental and public health campaigns. The picture, you might recognize the former governor of California in the picture. He's flanked by the Environment California State Director, Dan Jacobson. That organization is part of a network that owns Green Century. So what they are celebrating in this picture is reaching a campaign milestone of 1 million solar roofs in the state of California. It was a campaign that was launched when Governor Schwarzenegger was in office, and the goal of 1 million roofs was met after he had left office. And so what they are doing in the picture is celebrating at that win. So that's an example of the type of campaigns that our owning organizations work on. They are primarily state-based organizations that are part of a national network. So the scope is pretty significant. And I understand that the network is next week doing a number of things. And again, your founder, Bill McKibben, is very involved has been very involved with Green Century, as evidenced by doing a panel with us and co-author of our guide to fossil fuel-free investing. And then he's also doing a set of things with the Public Interest Network over the course of the next month. Okay, so that's our ownership structure. So why don't I pause here and see if there are any questions about any of that. I don't see any in the chat. All right, well then, really that takes us through the end of our presentation today. Again, I have to show you a bunch of disclosures, and so I'm just going to scroll through those, and then I'll come back to this lovely picture on investing fossil fuel free. Again, I very much appreciate the opportunity to spend time with you all today. I consider the climate crisis the most important problem to be addressed of our lifetime. And so very much appreciate the fact that you all are here alongside me on a Saturday doing things that help to allow us to keep making progress on that issue. So fair game on anything else if there are other, any other questions that I can field.
Hey, Gigi, it's Melissa. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was awesome. I have a question. Is there a minimum amount needed to invest in one of the mutual funds?
Yes, the mutual funds, all three of them actually have an individual share class and an institutional share class. All three have an individual share class and an institutional share class. As an individual, you would most likely go for the individual share class, and the minimum investment for that is $2,500.
Okay.
There's a lot of information also about that on our website. You can check greencentury.com and the funds section of the website to get information about each of the funds, the performance of each of the funds, the minimum requirements, and then how to go about setting up an account.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
I have a question kind of relating to racial equity and solving a lot of the racial injustices that have happened. So especially this year, our country has just realized how much of a priority equity is in everything we do. And I feel like a lot of environmental organizations are realizing that we can't just say we're fighting climate change if we're not also addressing how BIPOC communities are the ones facing the brunt of climate change. So what kind of ways do you see, besides maybe changing the actions of really large corporations and having that affect all of us beneficially, but how can your group more directly address those kinds of inequities?
The main way that we have addressed this in this year has been through the work of our owners. And that's one of the things that's great about having owners that are in the fight with us like this, is because that allows us to be involved in things that maybe are more indirect to Green Century's investment strategies. The Public Interest Network earlier this year launched essentially a fund, a fund in which the network was contributing dollars towards a list of organizations that were focused on racial inequities specifically. And the profile of the number of organizations that were involved in that fund are pretty significant. There's a big number of them, and many of them are really, really local. Organizations that are very much kind of in the neighborhoods that are directly impacted by the things that we've seen. So the approach from the network that Green Century is a part of was to really help to bolster and support the very good work that was happening on the ground by other organizations and funding those efforts. Significant resources. I don't have an exact number of dollars that have been contributed over the course of this effort, but significant. And the thing that I think is most compelling about it is that it's funding organizations that are on the ground doing the work themselves, because that is a more meaningful way to enter the dialogue. Anything else?
Well, I'll put a plug in just because I'm very familiar with Green Century and other sustainable and socially responsible mutual funds in the space with the work that I do. And I'll just note for people who are trying to find more information and do it themselves, that there's a lot of, there's this big push, and a lot of new ESG, environmental social governance funds have been coming out, or they're labeled sustainability funds. And they apply a lot of those screens to the investment strategy, like that first portion that Gigi talked about. But oftentimes they don't apply the same amount of effort into their ability as shareholders to engage in a really meaningful way with the companies that they're investing in. Something that you can take a look at is their proxy voting record. It's technically publicly available, if not on the mutual funds company's website. You can go to the SEC because oftentimes these funds like to talk about they do engagement, which is something that a mutual fund company will do anyway. whether they're green or socially responsible or not. They talk, their analysts, their fund managers talk to these companies that they're investing in all the time. So company dialogue and company engagement doesn't necessarily mean anything, but if they actually file resolutions themselves for the annual meeting, or co-file, or how they vote, even if they don't file themselves, how others, you know, when they file resolutions, how they vote on those measures, when the ballot comes to them, is something else. I had a client who had a traditional financial advisor who put them in this very well-known name that has these ESG funds now. And they were like, well, this is green. Is this good enough? And I was like, well, you know, they're doing this one part, but if you also look at how they engage these companies and actually push them to do better or not, I took them through, like, very quickly about 100 different votes that they'd had across, votes across about 100 different companies within that fund. And any time that you saw an ESG type resolution come up, whether it was requesting that they report out on gender pay discrepancies at the company, or you know, tying sustainability metrics to the CEO's bonus and compensation, or you know, to report out on their carbon emissions, every single time this company voted against it. They were like, no, 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 no. And so I pointed it out to this person. I was like, does this look like they're walking the walk? You know, because they're talking a big talk in their sustainability report, you know, and that they're ESG funds, but when it comes down to it, they're missing and completely nullifying, you know, the impact. Like, this is not what I would consider a truly sustainability fund. So given what Green Century does, you are such a leader, you file so many resolutions, you really push these companies to do better, which is often not seen with a lot of these products that are coming out into the space right now that are ESG related and sustainability related.
Celia? All right, well, I am going to stop sharing my screen because I think you all have other business to tend to, which I will hang out for, if that's okay.
Definitely. Thank you so much. Sylvia, did you want me to go into the 350 updates, or did you want to lead that?
If you can, that would be great.
Sure. So thank you everyone for joining us today. As you're aware, each month we host a different presenter to raise awareness about climate change or how you can be an advocate for the environment. So we're crafting the list for 2021. So if you have any ideas, feel free to reach out to us or share them in the chat if there's something you're interested in hearing more about. I can already say that in March, we'll have the Chicago Muslim Green Team talking with us so that we can hear about the great work that they're doing. Also, to give you an update on some of our campaigns, we are working on trying to get the city of Chicago to divest from fossil fuels, and we've had some really good luck with that so far. We met with the previous administration's treasurer, Kurt Summers, and he started to unwind the city's money in fossil fuels. We do not yet have it codified by law in the city yet that they will no longer invest in fossil fuels, but they were starting to unwind. And we met with the current administration's treasurer's office, and they said they're continuing that work. They're also working on crafting policy, their investment policy, and so we did ask them to include divestment in that. So they did say to reach back out after Thanksgiving, so I actually just followed up this week. So hopefully more to come on that, but just want to say there's really good news that the city is working towards divestment. We just want to make sure that it's publicly, that the public is aware of it, and that the city is committed to it through law as well. So if you want to get more involved in any of our campaigns, we have a strategy meeting on December 13th. So I'll put the information in the chat, but you're welcome to join us there, where we really dig into the campaign work. Another campaign that we're working on, 350 Chicago, is part of the Ready for 100 collective, and that is spearheaded by the Sierra Club, but lots of environmental organizations work together to get the city onto 100% renewable energy. So in April of 2018, the city unanimously passed a resolution And so the city is committed to going to 100% renewable energy by 2035, I believe, and transportation by 2040. So we are in the process of crafting the policy for that. So how will the city actually implement this? What will we hold them to? And so we had a Power Up series where we led community conversations back in September and October to hear from the citizens of Chicago about what's important to them as we have a just transition to renewable energy. So, and out of those conversations, we put together surveys, one around saving money, one around jobs, one around health, and one around renewable energy. So we sent out those surveys via our listserv, but if you want more information about that, you can email me. I'll put my email in the chat now. But if you want to take those surveys, feel free to send me an email and I'll send it back to you. The only thing is they're due by December 7th. So basically we took all of the feedback from the community, and then it's a survey where you basically have two options and you weigh which is more important. So that's really going to help us weight what's most important to the city. And then we are launching policy research teams. So if anyone wants to help actually research what other cities are doing, what we want Chicago to do, we're really getting into the nitty-gritty of crafting policy. So let me know if you're interested in that. And then lastly, we are working with the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition. So Alex McLeese in our group is heading up that for our group, but we are trying to get the state onto 100% renewable energy. So there's a lot of work going on there with contacting legislators, writing letters to the editor. I recently had a letter to the editor published in the Daily Herald about CJA. So we just really want to raise awareness and make sure that the state votes for that. So you can call your congresspeople. We actually had Sierra Club led a letter writing campaign. We reached out to our state representatives. So I really encourage you to get involved in that as well. So those are our campaigns focused on divestment and renewable energy. And then we also are subdivided into groups. So if you want to get more involved in the 350 group work, we have an education committee who plans these monthly meetings along with other education events. So I lead that up. So again, feel free to contact me. We have a fundraising committee. We're actually in the midst of a grant writing class. So we're trying to find ways that we can raise money and write grants for 350 because we just became a nonprofit last month. So that's super exciting. And then we also have a communications team. So people who do the technology, like Kyle, run the meeting, record the meeting, work on our website, post on social media. So if you're interested in the communications committee, that's available as well. And we also have a research committee. So Alex, who I mentioned before, leads that up, but they're just researching for our newsletter that goes out twice a month. They're researching for policy and information that will help 350. So those are some ways that you can get involved. So again, feel free to reach out to me via email. And if you're new and are not yet on our mailing list, you can write your name in the chat and I will make sure that I add you to our listserv following the meeting. So does anyone have any questions about 350 Chicago? Okay. So I think, does anyone else have anything they want to add? Otherwise, we can wrap up for today.
Well, I can add a little nugget as someone who works on the fundraising committee. We just had our Giving Tuesday campaign this week, December 1st, and we did really well through a lot of supporters. We got $3,300 that we raised on Tuesday and around the Tuesday Giving Tuesday. So that was really fantastic. And oddly enough, we're going to have another campaign at the end of the year appeal, for the holidays and into the new year. So we'll be sending that out again. But I'm really excited at the sort of support that we've been getting from people in the city of Chicago and Chicago Metroland area to support the work that we're doing. So that was really great. And I just wanted to share that with everybody.
Yeah, I'm glad you did. Thank you. That's
and if
awesome.
we're able to hit our highest goal, then the Larry TikTok dance incentive might roll over if you want to see some awkward TikTok dancing from someone that maybe hasn't even seen one before.
Yeah, so for those people who don't know, Larry Coble is the new board chair of 350 Chicago, and he committed to, if we cross at the year-end appeal, if we pass, what is it, $2,500, he's going to create a dance on TikTok for everybody's enjoyment.
Great. All right, thank you so much, everyone. That will conclude for today. And we're still looking for our January presenter, but I have a few ideas, so be on the lookout for what's coming up next month. And thank you so much for joining. We really appreciate it. And thank you, Gigi, for the great presentation. I know I for sure will be looking into Green Century Fund. So thank you for all the work that you do as well.
All right, thanks everybody.
Thanks, bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.